Shalom Aleichem. My name is Rabbi Joey, and you have reached the Yoke Messiah YouTube channel. This week we have a very intimate setting with me and Mr. Noah, who is here with us, and we're going to go over some of the points of this week's Parsha Behar-Bechukotai. Easier for me to say. And we're just going to pull out some of our favorite points that we noticed this week in our studies, and hopefully it's a blessing to you. If you need to reach us for any reason, you can at yokeofmessiah@gmail.com, or if you want to follow along with us, you can at facebook.com/group/yoke of Messiah. Thanks so much for listening, and here we go. This again is Parsha Behar-Bechukotai, and it starts in Leviticus chapter 25, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. And verse 1. We're not going to read through it, but we will hit some of the high points. Mr. Noah, did you have anything in particular in chapter 25 that was standing out to you?
No, I mean, obviously it gets into kind of the meat of it pretty quick. Starts talking about the Sabbath years and those kinds of things, which we've discussed several times. Nothing new really jumped out at me.
The only thing that struck me this year in reading it was in the chapter 25, verse 2. It says, "Speak to the children of Israel, you shall say to them, when you come to the land that I'm giving you, the land shall rest a Sabbath to the Lord." And of course, it goes on to say, "You may sow your field for 6 years. For 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in its produce, etc. But in the seventh day, in the seventh year, the land shall be a complete rest." It made me think that from the way it read this year to me was that since they didn't have any knowledge of what kind of rest the land may have been given from the people that lived there previously, that maybe year one, when they enter the land, they're not supposed to do any, like, give it the first year they're there, give it a year of rest starting off, and then you can begin to till and sow. Now,
Well,
the
think
only,
about how that, I'm sorry.
sorry,
No, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I've always heard people talk about when's the sabbatical year, when's the sabbatical year. Well, I can't say with perfect specificity when it is. I know when it's, you know, when the rabbis tell us they believe that it is. What stood out to me more is that when people want to do it, even in the dispersion, in the diaspora, that maybe if you're going to do this, that instead of trying to figure out when it is or when it is not, that maybe when you purchase a new piece of land, wherever in the world you may be, if you're a person that keeps Torah, that year, that first year that you're there, you should let the land rest before you do anything to it, because you don't know what the previous owners and occupants have been doing up to that point. So maybe give the land a chance to rest and then start the cycle. Not to say that that makes it a sacred time or a sacred Sabbath for anybody else, but it would for you in regards to the property God has given you individually. So,
Well, and if you think about it in those terms, because I thought the same thing when I read verse 2. I mean, that was like I just kind of guess I was reading more slowly today, or that just I at least had a good attention span at that point. But that kind of I realized that as well. And to your point, if that was the case, so if you think about it, that would have been a sabbatical year, and then they would have started counting sabbatical years. And after 7 sabbatical years, they'd have had. So really, not only would that have counted as a sabbatical year, that would be a jubilee year,
right,
because the jubilee year comes after, and it's also a sabbatical year.
right.
And so that would have kind of been, if you're backing up, like, okay, well, as soon as we get there, that's really, we're going to have a sabbatical, and then we're going to start, and then we'll start counting the sabbatical years. So
Right.
anyway, that sounds convoluted when I talk it out, but anyway.
No, I'm following right along. I'm wondering, like, and maybe that's the challenge that folks are trying to count back to see, well, when exactly, what year did they enter the land? That would be the year that, I'm assuming we have some historical time marker, but I believe that some of those may be, estimates and not actual. I mean, if you had the actual year like XYZ BCE, then you could absolutely just count up to now and know, okay, well then this is it, and just keep moving forward. But I
Um,
don't know that anybody has that. Like
well, and
that.
that would kind of make sense too, because if you think about, I mean, when they finally get to the land, and at this point, when he's speaking to them, I don't think they know that it's going to be another how many years. What year are we in? 3 here? I can't remember when he's given when is he given this? Is this year 1 year?
Oh yeah. Oh, you mean like out of Egypt and into the
Yeah,
wilderness sort of thing? Yeah,
right.
I don't. I think this is year one, but I couldn't swear to it.
Okay. So I mean, they don't realize at this point they're going to be walking around for another 39 years.
Right.
Um, and when they do get there, it will certainly be, a jubilee year for them, because they're going to be happy to get in the land. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Um, the only other note that kind of stood out to me this year was in in chapter 25 in verse 37 that
so
uh,
that'll be what, the second or third Alia?
let me see.
Third.
Third.
Is that third? Yeah, thank you. Sorry. I've not actually been studying by Alia this here recently. I've been looking more at just going through chapters because I go a chapter a day while I'm on my drive to work typically. Um, but yes, third, 25:37. You shall not give him, meaning your neighbor, your money with interest, nor shall you give your food with increase. I read it in the New King James. It said, let's see. Uh, I'm in the wrong chapter. Give me a moment. You shall not lend him your money for usury or interest, as it were, nor lend him your food at profit. So, just the idea that you're not allowed to is it saying that you can't profit uh, in doing business with your brothers and sisters in regards to Israelite people, Hebrew people, Jewish folk, whomever, or proselytes or whatever? Uh, or is it just saying that word lending there makes it to me seem like you're helping someone who's in need, not just doing commerce back and forth? I don't know. Y'all's thoughts?
But I would think probably all, of course, who else would they be around, I guess. But, and is it still specifically talking about in the Jubilee year at this point? Because if so, that means that they'd be prospering off of what God specifically provided for, because he told them, hey, don't, during this, that sabbatical year and the Jubilee year,
Right.
in the 6th year, I'm going to give you enough food for 3 years, so that while you're sowing in the 8th year, you'll still be eating what I provided in the year before the sabbatical year. And then of course Jubilee year, same thing. So does it have to do with the people, or does it have to do with his provision and not prospering off of his? I mean, I understand God provides all things, whether it's a sabbatical year or not, but at this point, it's kind of like the manna. It's no need to sell manna to anybody, because he's providing manna enough for everybody anyway, right?
Right.
And so if that would lend me to believe that maybe he's talking about the foreigner in this in that specific thing, because the foreigner would be the only one who maybe didn't have land to eat from, or maybe it's just non-land owners. I don't
Right.
know.
I apologize. I agree with what you're saying. I apologize. I left a verse out of the context of the thing here. We back up to 25:35. If your brethren becomes poor and falls into poverty among you, you shall help him like a stranger or sojourner. There's the connection there, that he may live with you and take no usury interest, and lend him your money without usury and food without profit. That doesn't mean that he would not repay, but it would not be, if he becomes able to, but it would not be at interest. So,
Yeah.
but that does dovetail with the idea of the stranger and the sojourner.
Well, this one actually says in the Kabod one, I don't know what version that is, but it says a convert or a resident. So that would be a little more specific. I don't know if obviously I didn't do the word study on that, what that word is there, but if it is, if it is closer to convert, then then yeah, that would be a fellow believer, God fearing person.
Right. Let me look at it.
It says if your brother becomes destitute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that again tends to make me believe that it is something more akin to convert than alien.
Yeah.
The alien or goyim or something like that is what is
Well,
typically.
the first word is ger, which just means someone from among the nations, and sojourner is toshav, which it's translated as sojourner there. It can also be translated stranger, foreigner, and or inhabitant, depending on the translation. So sounds like a sojourner, which I always take to mean a proselyte, and then of course a ger, which doesn't necessarily mean a complete foreigner. That could be somebody from among the nations who is there trying to, you know, integrate.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Or a pilgrim or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the same thing you were saying.
Right. Let's see here. Before we move on, was there anything else in Alia 3 that you would like to speak on or that stood out to you this year?
No, but it does. If Ben doesn't have anything on that, the Alia 4 kind of continues that. It seems to continue that line of thinking when it talks about how you are to work your brother, not with rigor and basically taking it, basically don't work them like a slave.
Yeah.
So that whole idea. Yeah, there's a lot of that I'm not sure that I fully understand exactly what they're talking about. I think I need context of the day to really fully understand what the meaning is there. I mean, are we talking about indentured servitude here? Are we talking about destitution and helping people up out of poverty? I don't know. Or are we just talking about straight up taking advantage of people?
Right. I think definitely, even though a permanent servitude can be found, spoken of, even in this particular parsha, of people from among the nations that can be placed into a permanent servitude. Those people become, I mean, looking at the example of Abraham, those people become his family and his, like, they live with him and they become disciples of him and end up being circumcised and being integrated into the community. So, in there, we know there's rules regarding not just uh, here specifically talking about a Hebrew who's been placed into slavery until the time of Jubilee, but that there are rules regarding not allowing cruelty to slaves and to those permanent hired people. Uh, So again, like I always like to bring up, the term slave is a very loaded word in our society, and unfortunately, there is still slavery that happens around the world, which is a cruel and practice. Uh, what is slavery in Torah is more of, you know, hirelings. We would be considered slaves because we don't own our properties necessarily, and we don't have enough money to purchase everything that we always need. So we have enslaved ourselves to a degree to the corporations and businesses that we've worked for, um, to be able to afford, the life that we want to live, or to have purchasing power, you know. So unless you're independently wealthy and have land and food and all that without need of anybody else's, provision, uh, you have to, and work for them to get those provisions many times. So this is not the, can't remember what it's called, but this is not the slavery of, early America, and unfortunately, slavery that still happens around the world today.
And a lot of that isn't enforced slavery. The way that we think of it, I mean, it's like, they have their little wars over there, and then the losers get enslaved and then sold and stuff like that. That doesn't seem to be the context of what this is talking about. This seems to be talking about, I can't feed my family, so let me go find some rich guy and, let him acquire me. Because
Yeah,
it even is talking about them as property in verse
right.
46. It does, but at the same time, I don't. Like, if you just pick one verse out, it could sound like the Torah promotes what happened in the South, but I think completely the opposite. If you take in what all the verses say, what happened, and it's still happening, like you said, is not at all condoned or okay.
Right.
So
No, I look at it from this perspective. I don't have enough money or investments personally to be independently wealthy, though I do have some money squirreled away, and I do have investments. Now, if those investments come to fruition before the time of, all my debts being paid that I have, a mortgage, cars, whatever, um, if for some reason those investments, matured and I didn't have to work anymore, I could pay off my debts and leave the company to which I've, you know, give my time to, sold myself to, whatever verbiage we want to use there. I wouldn't have to do that anymore, because I would have, and, gotten to a point where I'd be independent. And that's what this looks like to me. If these, men and women who are in that position, if they're acquired as property, property can be, transferred back and forth. So if they came to a point where they, in their, wages were able to, or found some other means to make money, that they didn't have to be in that position of servitude anymore, it could very well be that they could purchase themselves out of it. Um, but even whether that is an option or not, we know that cruelty to one's, whether they be indentured servitude Hebrews or this acquired purchased property, um, that can be, even handed down to children as an inheritance, uh, that kind of, cruelty and abuse is not, um, condoned according to the scriptures, according to Torah. So,
So something just hit me, and it's
mhm,
one of those things that you realize, hey, I'm 43. I probably should have realized this by now. So just for some reason, when y'all were talking, and y'all were talking about that and being a servant. So these guys worked in their master, if that's the word we use, in their master's fields. And then, so now, like you said earlier, we kind of sell ourselves out to corporations or, whatnot. Or we even go to college to study in a certain field.
mhm,
And then we find work in our field. I don't think I've ever related those really, actually working in a in a literal field, for literal food,
Right.
versus what we do today, where everything is a barter system. And I may
Right.
be an engineer, I may be working in the field of engineering, and that field is in the ether, but I do work in that field. And anyway, so I'm sorry, I just I had to get that out, that I'm now on board with the word field.
Right. I had not put those two together though, but that is an excellent comparison to what's being talked about here. You know, we're you know we're exchanging our effort for purchasing power. Um,
Well, and even if you think about that I think it's a proverb or something, when it talks about a man who finds a treasure in a field,
mhm.
and he goes and he buries it, and then he goes and gets the money and buys the field.
Right.
He can do, that I'm not trying to go crazy with this, but entrepreneurship, when you are good at something and you kind of do become maybe not independently wealthy, like the way we kind of, what rolls through my mind anyway when I think independently wealthy, but you work for yourself. My
Right.
father-in-law created a restaurant, built it up. He had to actually go into debt for that, so he enslaved himself to a bank for that for a certain period of time. But he was like, hey, I think we got a good thing here, I think we can do this, and then we'll make money. And then
Right.
and so with it's definitely analogous, to what we see and read about in the Bible. It's just modern day.
Sure. I see it even in the in the analogy to what like the stock market is. If you see if you're watching, you know what to look for, and you see an investment and you see that it's really starting to blossom, but you can't participate in it because you don't have the capital to put in it, you can go take a loan, turn around. It's super risky, but go take a loan, purchase that. If it matures and does what you're forecasting and hoping for it to do, you can take those earnings, pay off that debt, and then hopefully ride that rocket ship to the top. Um, but let's see. I think I turned a light
That
on.
we were actually talking around in Aliyah 4,
Mm,
and that gets down in the middle. It transfers over to chapter 26,
mm-hmm.
which starts talking about not making idols for yourselves, keeping his Sabbaths, following his statutes, observing his commandments. And he says, in exchange for that, in verse 4 of chapter 26, I will give your rains in their time. The land will yield its produce, and the tree of the field will give forth its fruit.
Right.
And he kind of expounds on that more in the latter ones. So we've always seen, or we've seen earlier with his previous covenants, the things that he has promised, and uh, they're all in the same vein. But now he's saying, hey, if you'll do these things, I will shine my blessing, and my blessing will be with you. It's kind of what I'm
Absolutely.
reading that as. Even
The
to the point of at the end of that, where he talks about, you will pursue your enemies; they will fall by the sword before you. 5 will pursue 100, and 100 will pursue 10,000. So
yeah, exponential, blessing over time. The I'm glad you went into this. I was gonna make a point of speaking of verse 1. It says, don't make idols for yourselves, not to set up a statue or a monument for yourselves, and in your land you shall not place a pavement stone on which to prostrate yourselves, for I am the Lord your God. Now, um, the idea that here that I was thinking about the other day, that really, according to Hoyle, idolatry that's being referred to here is kind of I mean, at least for the most part, to most people I know, myself included, uh, that's kind of a foreign thing. You don't really think of people, you know, having idols or whatever, not on a regular basis, at least not in the Western world. But but that really anything that you give supremacy in your heart or mind to, and in the course of your life can become an idol if it's not God. And that idolatry isn't so much a thing, or an idol isn't so much idolatry as letting something mean the chief place of your life and your heart. Um, and in that regard, people can make anything an idol. You can make the clock on the wall, or your kids, or your wife, or your job, or money, or not having money. You know, and and that's really a super challenge to not even not even treat your own life as a believer as just something to our life as believers are not a life of sin management. That's not what we're here for. We're here to get close to God, not just manage the things that we do wrong. We're supposed to be focused on doing the right things and getting closer to God and having a relationship with Him. Uh, and so, even uh, you know, trying to make life about, or making the mistake of making our own lives about just trying to be sin management, to me, speaks of idolatry, for the fact that you're not focusing on God, you're focusing on you and what you're doing or not doing, or, you know. And so, while that's a challenge, because God has told us to avoid evil, um, really bringing even those efforts in subjection to God and His call on our lives, that's a real challenge, not to make things an idol. Um,
Yeah, something you said at the very beginning reminded me. I don't know if it was something I read today. I don't think it was in the Parsha. It may have been, but no, because I think it was actually, it may have been something else I was reading the Bible earlier today or this week.
mm,
But something to the point of, like when you said that about getting money or not having money, whatever, making those kinds of things idols. And I think it was talking about Yeshua. You know, didn't go out and hoard for himself or try to find a job, make money, whatever. He just took, when he prayed, give us this day our daily bread. Give us this day our portion. That we just want our portion for today. We'll worry about tomorrow's portion tomorrow.
right.
And so I think that it's very easy for us to be guilty of even that kind of idolatry. Just even in the planning that we do from the time we get up in the morning, any given morning, um, you know, just thinking about, well, I need to go do this and do this, and then I've got this bill due next week. I need to pay this off, and we're planning out, so far. Not that it's bad to plan necessarily, not that he's speaking against planning,
Right.
but don't do it to the point of worrying yourself over it unnecessarily, because he's
Right.
in control of that, and he's going to take care of that. So just worry about today's portion. Worry about doing the things that are set before you today,
Mm,
um, and then go from there.
yeah.
But yeah, we talk about it all the time. Down south, football is a huge idol. We will put all kinds of things on hold or do whatever we can to see a game or make it to a game or support our team or whatever. And how often do you see that for God?
And that's baseball, football, whatever, just wherever you're at, in the world, or what part of the country. But yeah, absolutely. I think we're all guilty of it, and that's something I try and keep in the back of my mind all the time. Is, um, again, I agree with you. Planning is a good thing, but don't allow, once the plan is set, write it down and know where you put it, so that you don't have to let it consume your thoughts at all times, because that can, you know, I can fall into that. Like, this is the plan, this is the plan, thinking about it. This is the plan, this is the plan, or whatever. We're going to do this, to do this, to do this, to do this. And, I've done that many times before. And it's almost like God will allow a detour in my life, because just to be like, well, it's still all going to get there and it'll still be just as great on the other end of this detour. But just to remember, set goals, but don't be inflexible, and don't let those goals become gods. So, But like the scripture you brought up, he says basically if we obey, we'll be blessed more than we can contain, and that God will take care of our enemies from before us, which is what I pray for. I don't want to have to deal with them. I want him to him to him to deal with them for me.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I was looking to see there was one more thing, and before we get too far away from the sabbatical years and the Jubilee years that I had noticed that I meant to bring up. This is back in chapter 25. I think it starts talking about, I think it's getting to this point. Well, I don't see it. But basically it was saying, let's see. Basically it was saying that one of these verses was saying that the land basically would get back its Sabbaths. So if that didn't happen, if we forsook his commandment there to allow the land to rest and to do those things, that it would get back all its Sabbaths. The land would lie desolate. It would get back its Sabbaths in that desolation.
Right.
So like that got me thinking, like, how many years have we gone without actually following that or being able, in some way to follow that? And I started calculating up, and like, I mean, even if you just go back 4,000 years, say it's been that long, it's like 500 and something sabbatical years, not to mention the Jubilee years. 560, some pretty high five number. So that means that the land would sit there for that many years, barren, unproducing, getting back its Sabbaths. That
Right.
just kind of struck me.
Well, maybe I don't know. This is probably super fuzzy math. Maybe that's why there's a millennial reign.
Yeah, could be.
Because God's basically gonna press the reset button and let the land rest. Now I know people will be working during that time, so that's probably a wrong-minded thing on my part, but that may be part of the reason why it's a millennial reign that happens at the end of this dispensation, whatever you want to call that. Not for anybody out there wondering, not supporting dispensational theology, but just this period of time in which we were waiting, which the rabbis tell us, we're in the 6 days, and then the 7th day of the Sabbath, that millennium, that 7,000th year that we're all waiting on.
Yeah, that's interesting. He had told them all the things that he would do if they forsook his commandments, basically. And I think I think maybe we're getting to that in the 5th or 6th Aliyah. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I lost it.
Yeah, it's like 2615-ish.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, where 14 he says, "But if you do not listen to me and do not perform all these commandments, and if you despise my statutes and reject my ordinances, not performing any of my commandments, thereby breaking my covenant, then I too will do the same to you. I will order upon you shock, consumption, fever, and disease that cause hopeless longing and depression. You will sow your seed in vain, and your enemies will eat it. I will set my attention against you, and you will be smitten before your enemies." And he goes on. But what he doesn't say there, the thing that he doesn't say is that he will break his covenant, because he goes on and on about all these things that he'll do to us. But all these things that he says he will do to us are to try to bring us back, to make us realize we need to come back to keeping his commandments.
Right.
And he says, and if you still don't, well, then I'll break out, sevenfold, where does he say that?
18.
I
think.
So if during these you will not listen to me, I will add another 7 punishments for your sin. And he says that a couple of times. So probably 18, and then in a few more verses he'll say it again. I'm going to do these things to you, and then if you still don't do it, then I'm going to add even 7 more punishments, for your sins. But what he never says is that he will break faith with us. And something I've been studying lately is when it talks about faith, like even when we're reading in the Brit Hadashah about faith, it's usually talking about Yeshua's faithfulness,
Right.
not our faithfulness to him or to God, but relying on Yeshua's faithfulness, because he was faithful in all things, and he did, he kept the commandments, did that. But yeah, he spends a lot of time here telling us, hey, if you'll just come back, and if you don't do it, I'm going to do this, but if you'll just come back, then I'll make everything right. But if you still don't do it, then and he goes through that cycle a couple times here.
Right. So I think it's around 44, verse 44. But despite all this, while they are in the land of their enemies, I will not despise them, nor will I reject them to annihilate them, thereby breaking my covenant that is with them, for I am the Lord their God. I will remember for them the covenant made with their ancestors, whom I took out of the land of Egypt before the eyes of the nations, to be a God to them. I am the Lord. These are the statutes, the ordinances, the laws the Lord gave between himself and the children of Israel on Mount Sinai. So yeah, we're still at around Mount Sinai time. But the idea that as horrible as things get in here, I mean, people eating their kids and stuff like that, as horrible as it gets, that God still would, then if you repent, that he'll forgive and draw you back. There isn't a human on earth that would be that gracious to forgive that much. I took a quick list here. It says, if we don't obey, there will be feverish diseases that cause wasting of the body and destruction of the eyes. The work of our hand will be consumed by our enemies. There will be anxiety and terror. We will not be able to be productive, and our strength will be spent in vain. Animal attacks, loss of children, pestilence, and being ruled over by our enemies. Food insecurity, eating the flesh of the children, whether that be, I thought this was interesting, the idea that eating the flesh of their children, whether by cannibalism or by not being able to provide for them, or having to burden them by taking care of the family when they should be able to enjoy being children, or invest themselves in their own education instead of supporting the family. And when someone dies, and let's see, and when someone dies, disobedience to God, he will throw their bodies onto the idol that they let rule their lives. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing, that if people are participating or making things gods that are not God, that he will connect their death to the thing that they made their God. So it's interesting, and maybe be a thing to go back and even in our own minds and imaginations, go back and think on people we know who have passed, uh, um, the nature of their passing, and see what they were about in their life, and see if we can connect their passing to that thing. I mean, certainly I have friends who both, um, well, I'll say, growing up, I had friends, people that I knew, not people I keep up with anymore, uh, friends who ended up being murderers. Of course, they're in prison now. People who were murdered, people who died of their own hand, either directly or by drug use. And so these people's fates are tied to the work of their hands, and God does draw that correlation there, it seems like.
Yeah.
But again, as long as there's life, there's hope. And if a person done the most evil of things, if they repent, doesn't necessarily mean they won't be freed from guilt of their sin in this world, but they can be forgiven, by God for the next.
Yeah, that's interesting. By the way, the verse that I was trying to come up with a while ago is in that same section just before that. It's in that same Aliyah 5. It's verse 34 that says, well, back up to 33. It says, "I will scatter you among the nations. I will unsheath the sword." This is this is just part of the stuff that he's saying he'll do if they don't, keep his commands. It says, then the lamb will be, in 34, it says, then the lamb will be appeased regarding its sabbaticals.
There you go.
During all the days that it remains desolate while you are in the land of your enemies, the land will rest and thus appease its sabbaticals. So he repeats that twice there. So, yeah. So and I know that's always that's something we talk about often too, is when it's repeated, it's pretty much golden.
Right. And I wonder if I've been told, I don't know, I've not lived there, I've been there, but told that the sabbatical years have never been, at least not for any more than maybe one or two, have never been on a national scale observed. Now, some people do observe them, even if it's through, crop rotation, allowing land to lie fallow, et cetera, et cetera. But that national Israel has not observed uh, sabbatical and jubilee years in regards to allowing the land to rest. And so it kind of goes back to that point you were making earlier about, well, if it's just counting 3,500 years, 4,000 years since the giving of the Torah, that would, what did you say, 550-ish in that neighborhood?
Let me look at this again. So if we say, let's just do 3,500 years.
Right.
And divide that by 7. So that would be an even 500. That's not including the Jubilee years. That's just the sabbatical years. That would be, and so, that's a rough number, but 500 years worth of it getting back its Sabbaths. That's a long time,
Yeah, it is.
So, yeah, and we talked about this one other time. We just don't understand. God does everything for a purpose. Everything for a reason, and even to the current point of COVID-19. I don't know what the reason is exactly, but I brought this up, in another parsha that we were discussing on here. We can't understand the depths of the reasoning for all the commandments that he gives us. And so this is another one of those that, why? And it may not just be for the land itself. It may be all around, some bigger reasoning that we can't understand. We start playing with things like genes, genetics, stuff like that. I mean, we're partially to blame for this virus. I believe it was something. I don't think it was just a mutation. I think it was probably something created in a lab. And even some of the things that we do that are good.
Right.
We can't foresee the repercussions of what those things are. Just like we can't see the repercussions of not letting the land rest. And again, not that it's bad for you to, hey, if you buy a new piece of property, you want to start doing, sabbatical years for that property, that's great. I agree with you. But there may be something that nationally, worldwide even, needs to be done, that it just needs to rest, so that all things can reset. Birds and bees, it may affect them, the cattle, the other things that live in the land, the streams and rivers, and all the stuff, the fruit from those vines, being able to fall and replenish the vine itself, because that's a lot of what's supposed to happen, at those times. It's just like one of my favorite things that you've always said, talking about when a new fruit tree is planted, you're not supposed to eat that fruit for the first 3 years.
Mhm.
And you've always related that back to like a new believer, kind of getting into the thing. But during those 3 years, that fruit falls and replenishes the plant.
Right.
And it has exactly what the plant needs, right? Because that's what it's producing. It's a lot of what it needs is in that fruit itself. So it's good for the plant.
Right.
So for that stuff to happen, and we just can't. Again, we can't understand. We don't have the depth to understand all that these seemingly odd commandments can cause in our lives, or in on a global scale.
Right.
What that means. So it's that to say all these are important, regardless of their oddity.
I completely agree. I hope that we aren't going to find ourselves in a cycle of the kind of illness that COVID-19 has been. Uh, I'm very excited to see the end of this thing, uh, but at the same time, it just lingers in the back of my mind sometimes that, like, oh man, I hope this is not going to be every few years there's a new COVID-19, COVID 20, God forbid, 5 or whatever, um, because we are abusing the earth or creating, uh, whether it's abusing the earth or eating things that we shouldn't, or because somebody created something in a lab, or some combination of all of these things. Um, I
Yeah,
hope that we can learn our lesson and not just continue to chase after what got us where we're at,
yeah,
because I kind of feel like, to a degree, we've dodged some bullets with swine flu and SARS and all that stuff. That stuff was bad, but it was not so far flung that a lot of it ended up just being, for most reference, just a punchline. Though I do know some people that got swine flu and got pretty ill. Uh, but in terms of like the scope of the thing, I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope this doesn't, start, not COVID even, but like some other weird thing. I just hope and pray this isn't something that's gonna mar the life of my kids, where every few years they're basically gonna have to lock themselves in their house for 2 years or whatever, until something becomes is either, you know, uh, either by medicine or miracle or both, makes a way to be able to be
well, and again, if you
taken.
look at even COVID-19 and what happened last year and what's still happening to a degree even now, I mean, there really was kind of a sabbatical in the land.
There was.
I mean, it's continuing even through now. I mean, uh, there, people, a lot of work just stopped, and it
Yeah.
wasn't just here; it was worldwide.
Yeah.
It's kind of, and of course, I'm a God person, so I'm looking for Him in those things, and so the first thing I see is, hey, God, yeah, He put his hand down and said, hey, just stop,
Right.
you know, and not that He wanted to do it that way, because I don't think He works in in punishment necessarily at that level. I mean, at some point we will pay. There is
Right.
punishment, but I don't think it's necessarily in that exact way. Um, but he used it to kind of slow things down, and I've heard a lot of people say, I think you included, that there was a good time to reconnect with family, like immediate family, really know who your family is and yourself, and take some time to reevaluate
Right.
life. And I think everybody's done that
Yeah.
uh, in a great way, in a large way. I mean, um, over this past year and a half. So and it continues. So we'll see what else comes of it. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think maybe it was a wake up call. Maybe it was a hey, I've told you some things to do. You need to start paying attention.
Right.
And,
I
and
know.
I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
If you couple that with what we've talked about for years now, this kind of great coming back to the Torah
Right.
that I see, and that just kind of continues to grow and swell in so many different ways, in a lot of different ways, people coming back to Torah or learning about it or being curious about it or, something.
Right.
It's very, it's not, I don't think it's just happenstance,
Right.
which he uses that word in this Parsha a lot, at least.
Yeah, it does.
I don't think it's just happenstance. I don't think we should treat him as happenstance, as he says in here.
Right.
So
I agree completely. Hopefully we're all listening and learning, you know, whether it's directly tied to COVID or not, just forcing a bit of a slowdown in the pace of life to some degree. Um, Hopefully we're all learn what it is and pick up what he's putting down. As I heard a guy say the other day, he's trying to tell us something, even if it's just seizing upon the opportunity that this has provided, not even necessarily a one for one, you know, directly related to COVID thing, but like you said, just to slow down the speed of life and forcing people to, you know, reassess where they're at, what they're doing, with whom they're doing it. You know, uh, I know that's happened for me a lot, and it's kind of helped me to refocus my life on, um, what God was telling me to do beforehand, what He's telling me to do now, what that looks like for the future when everything gets to a situation where we can begin to do those things. So. Ben, have we over talked you tonight, buddy? Or did you have anything you wanted to share? Any thoughts about any of this?
No, I'm good.
All right,
It's a long for the ride as of right now.
we're good. Well, mm, I won't say at the end of my experience with this Parsha, as we were discussing before we actually started recording. I just don't have a lot of insight. I mean, the information is there for the last Alia or the last two Alia, where it's talking about um, redeeming lives and that sort of thing and the limitations thereof, like lives, uh, like you can't redeem a life for someone who has committed a death penalty sin. Like if someone's condemned to die, you can't redeem them. But for everybody else, we're talking about, you know,
well, and it got to a point where it was talking about clean and unclean animals, and
right,
like it obviously it had nothing to do with like sacrificing them to him or whatever else, because you can't do that. But I didn't even understand like that part, like where it was talking about, and if the animal is of the unclean variety. I don't remember what it's in. I think it's in Alias 6, but I might be wrong.
verse 9, I think 27:9.
Yeah. Yes, it starts there. It says whatever part. If an animal of whose type is fit to be brought as an offering to the Lord, whatever part of it is the person donates to the Lord shall become holy. He should not exchange it or offer a substitute for it. Not really sure what that means either. Or for whether it be a good one for a bad one or a bad one for a good one. But if he does substitute an animal for another animal, both that one and its replacement shall be holy. And if it is any unclean animal of whose type shall not be brought as an offering to the Lord, then he shall stand up the animal before the Cohen. The Cohen shall then evaluate it, whether it is good or bad. Like the evaluation of the Cohen, so shall it be. But if he redeems it, he shall add its fifth to its value. Yeah, honestly, I don't even know what they're talking about.
I think some of this is like a donkey, let's say, or a horse. these are noble animals, but they are not animals to be regarded as sacrificial animals. Um, but the firstborn of those animals still has to be redeemed, because it says, if even if you have like a donkey and it's a firstborn, um, if you don't redeem it, you have to break its neck. So there's still a redemption price for those animals, and apparently it's up to the Cohen to assess those prices at that
Okay.
time. I
Well,
do that about that part. Um,
well, that clears up a lot for me.
yeah, in regards to that part, and in regards to the animal, for another animal, obviously you can't. If you have a good animal, you can't swap it for a bad one. If you're going to swap it, you have to swap it for an animal of equal holiness and unblemishedness. Um,
Or they both become holy, and then so I assume that means you have to redeem them both. I don't know.
yeah, that part I'm not entirely sure of. It does sound like if you have an animal that's set to be sacrificed, um, that you can pay its redemption value, whatever the Cohen decides, plus 20% of that. So 1/5 of that. And you don't necessarily, you can maybe redeem that animal from being sacrificed because you pay a redemption price for it. Um, so, but again, not a temple offering expert by any stretch of the imagination. So that's part of my not being fully aware that these are my best guesses. Now, it does talk about earlier in that same chapter about paying the valuation of redemption for people. And as we know, when someone's born, there's a price to be paid there, um, for redeeming the child. And it tells you, what I don't understand is why is it talking about redemption of a man who's over 60 years old? Does that mean maybe this is a man who's part of a family of converts, or is it a man who has been purchased as a slave, that they have to pay a redemption price for that person? Um,
Well, if you look at 27, this is in Aliyah 6.
mhm.
I don't know that this is exactly what you're talking about, but well, if we just start at the beginning of that Aliyah, chapter 27, verse 1 says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying," verse 2, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when a man expresses a vow, pledging the value of lives to the Lord, the fixed value of a male shall be as follows." So, so what kind of vow is he talking about? I guess
Yeah,
because then
that part I couldn't tell you.
because then it goes on from there to say, from 20 years old until 60 years old, the value is 50 silver shekels according to the holy shekel, and if she's a female, the value is 30 shekels, and so on. So yeah,
I can say Rashi has some thoughts on it. I don't know that they necessarily answer our question, but in regards to verse 2 of chapter 27, to give the valuation of his life. I take it upon myself to donate to the Holy Temple the value of a vital organ, such as the head or the liver. Not sure about that so much. Um, Not expressing doubt, I just don't see the connection here, or that it's not the answer to the question we're asking. In the next verse, the value stated here is not an expression of monetary value, the usual market value of a person sold as a slave, but whether he has a high market value or a low one, the value fixed for him in this passage is according to his age. And then the last letter of this word is not the second person personal suffix your, but rather a double of the preceding letter. Um, and therefore, the word is the same as value. And I do not know what the denotes here. Double letter denotes there. So he doesn't know as much as us, I think. I mean, he doesn't know as well as we do not know either.
Well, if you go
Um,
down to verse 5 and you look at his commentary, and
mm,
because it's there, it's talking about from 5 years old to 20,
mm,
says, not that the one who is vowing is a minor, because a minor's words have no validity. Rather, our verse is speaking of an adult who says, I take upon myself to donate to the holy temple the value of this 5 year old. So, so are they just taking vows to donate the worth? I mean, is this like a Thanksgiving offering? Is this, I mean, what kind of, I just don't understand, I guess, what vow this is that they're doing here. So if anybody watching this later on
please.
can add some, something to that, um, that would be great.
It almost to me sounds like, you know how we do this in Judaism all the time, how we will donate something in someone's name,
Sure.
like you're establishing a charity in someone's name, not even the person themselves necessarily, or a charitable giving. It almost sounds like that. I couldn't swear to it, but you know, so I'm not entirely sure. Um, so I think we're pretty well equally dumbfounded on this part.
Okay.
And it kind of goes into the same thing it's saying here in chapter 27, verse 16. Of course, it talking about consecrating a field of its inherited property to the Lord. The valuation shall be according to the sowing, an area which requires a homer of barley, seeds at 50 silver shekels. So I know this is talking about consecrating fields and redemption values again for this sort of thing. Uh, I went over it a couple times this year. It's not much more clear to me than it has been in the past, which is not very much. Um,
Okay. So here's something important to note that
mm,
down in verse 11. So this is Rashi's comments, um, talking about the unclean animal. It says, but the case of an unclean animal is stated later, verse 27. So what unclean animal is meant here? Says the text is speaking about a blemished animal, which is unclean, i.e., unfit for sacrifice, and scripture is teaching us that unblemished, consecrated animals cannot leave their holy status and enter into a mundane status through redemption unless they become blemished.
mm, okay.
So, so yeah. So it's not unclean like necessarily.
It's a firstborn animal, but it doesn't qualify as a sacrifice because of some sort of blemish.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can think all day long that I understand any of it, and I'm going to be lying to myself. So
We needed Deidre here with us tonight. She could probably make this a little more clear for us. But Deidre, if you're watching, please comment in the comments below and clear our misunderstanding.
yeah.
But I don't know if anybody didn't have any other thoughts about Alia 6 or 7, which kind of deal with some of the same issues again, fields and redemptions of that sort of thing. We can certainly button it up.
Yeah.
That suits you.
Yeah, I think that's good.
All right. Well, hopefully that suits you all at home who have been watching along with us, whether on your computer or on your phone or something else to that effect. We hope that this discussion, this Midrash, has been a blessing to you as much as it's been for us. Thank you so much for visiting with us. If you would like to follow up, you can. Again, comment in the section below. We would love to hear from you. If you want to follow along with our future teachings, you can just click the subscribe button and you'll be notified when we release more teachings, usually typically about once a week. If you need to reach me directly, you can at yokeofmessiah@gmail.com. And if you would like to join our Facebook community, you can at facebook.com/groups/Yoke of Messiah. But in the uh, meantime and in between times, we pray that you guys and gals are super blessed out there and that God will grant you the desires of your heart, and the chief desire of your heart will be close to Hashem. So thank you again so much for visiting with us this week. Shalom Aleichem.